time immemorial, cultures have had warnings built into their teaching about premature exposure to the real thing for young people, even middle-aged people. I think I understand why. Because you can be driven to madness easily by awe and wonder. Easily. So it's volatile stuff, yeah? The other world prevails, but doesn't persist in contact with this one.
All right, I had one more from the previous one, so I'm just going to keep going. And it's totally different space, but maybe not totally different space.
Okay.
You said somewhere, you love questions that begin with you said, but yeah, I can't help it.
We'll see if I said it.
Somewhere in the proceedings of our last encounter, you said, to my recollection at least, that the one God religions are going to have a lot to answer for.
Ah, yes. I probably said that.
Would you mind digging or unpacking that a little bit?
This is a vast question, though. It requires a lot of history to do it justice. And I'm not the best historian. But let's try. So the advocates of one God religions would have us understand that those religions represent the zenith of human capacity for meditation and contemplation, devotion, sacrifice, all of the high-end spiritual practices meet their maker, if you will, and their fullest expression, deepest incarnation in the one God religions. Everything else is either getting ready for the one God religions or a departure, a sad and wretched departure from them. Now, I'm not a one God religion person. I don't mean to demean them, which is easy to do in the historical record of the last, 1,000 years or so. Could prompt you to do that, But he who's without sin, let him so. But, caveat, but, there are certain knowable things about what the advent of one God religions has done. And I could sum it up, I think, fairly this way. The one God religions need an adversary, historically, and in terms of their missionizing project. They need a failure to succeed. So everything that came before them is either readying the way, sort of John the Baptist style, or mounting evidence of the wretchedness of the human condition minus the one God. So the adversary is everything that preceded them, which puts you on a wretched sort of collision course, I think, with ancestry, cultural inheritance, any kind of notion of continuity of any kind. It was just, they were born too soon. Your missionized, ancestors simply got a piece of bad luck. And they will never, even in retrospect, qualify, even with your intervention, qualify for the high end, that the one God religions provide their acolytes. The amazing thing is that there's not much evidence that the many God religions have a reciprocal enmity for the one God religions. In other words, you could say, risking sounding ironic and clever, that the one God religions view the many God religions as fakery at best, as misguidedness. But the many God religions don't similarly regard the one God religions as faulty, broken, misshapen, a monstrosity of some kind or other, or even as a mistake. In other words, if you have a many God pantheon, surely there's room for the one God in the pantheon, you see. And it would seem to be the case that the history of missionizing is really decorated with this reaction, that the many God religion people are fascinated by the one God religion notion, as if it's a kind of religiosity they didn't come up with on their own. And they're impressed. And sometimes deeply, sometimes in a way that disfigures them, impressed. And it makes them very vulnerable to what comes with the one God religions, to the cultures that come, that ride on the back of the one God, and the material culture that ensues. And a degree of self-hatred begins to find its way in as a prerequisite for qualification for this. That's, I think, what I mean when I say the one God religions have a lot to answer for. The machinery by which they saw to it that the one God religions prevail was a machinery very hard on the people it was allegedly there for. Extremely hard. And this is not a simply historical fact. This is the current regimes are full of the hard times that came to us as a consequence of being available to but failing to qualify for one God religion status.
So going way back, the way I like to do, to try to understand the present. What do you suppose was the function of religion at the beginning of religion?
You know, the question about beginnings, especially about something like religion or religiosity, is shrouded in a kind of mystery. And its mystery should be allowed to prevail when you wonder about it. I'll see what I can do. It kind of begs us to define our terms. Religion, the word itself helps. The lig root of the word religion is referring to the ligaments that are characteristic of your knee, the miracle of your knee. So if you imagine the word religion as a verb, as something you do, which I recommend, then you realize that there was a kind of array of not necessarily contending, but dissimilar elements of varying kinds of tensile strength. And the certain kind of arrangement of them, overlapping and whatever it is, gave it a suppleness and a capacity for miraculous sideward motion and all that kind of thing. So you can, hopefully this is clear metaphorically what I'm saying here. And then something happened to the arrangement. The suppleness went out, a certain stiffness or conviction ensued. And religion would appear, the word itself would appear to be an attempt to restore that suppleness to those elements. Ideally, that's what it should be, because that's what the word suggests. So you can hear that there's a kind of inference of a spirit history for people different people at different times, different ways and so on, but to generalize that there was an initial intactness. And I guess there was something before then. And then something happened to the intactness. And so the religion that you mean with your question, I wonder about in this way. When religion came on, did people say, great, I've been waiting for this for a long time? Was it self-evidently the thing? Did it even look like how we refer to it now when it came on? Was religion only religion in hindsight? Which I suspect is very likely. It wasn't restoration. I would suggest to you something happened to what we could call a primordial order that humans were part of. That religion, in the sense that you mean it, I think, in your question, is evidence of some rupture there. A rupture that you could fundamentally organize around the notion of belonging. That religion seems to be the thrashing about of people who don't belong, seeking to find a belonging for themselves and for each other. So what happens to people when they cease to belong somewhere? How does that happen? If belonging is a nascent skillfulness, how do people lose the skill? The particular skills of belonging gather around the word. So the ability to belong is the ability to exercise an acute condition called longing. In English, that's what it means. It means you exercise the skills of longing in the presence of what you long for. You're not longing for it because it's not there. You're longing for it because the power, the reciprocating power of longing bids you to do so. It is a kind of prayerfulness. It's not gimme, gimme, gimme. Not that kind of prayer. It's the oh my godness of it all. Yeah. When you belong somewhere, part of the condition of belonging is not being unsure that it's true. It may be a matter of learning the etiquette of belonging, because we're now talking about a place historically for humans. You belong somewhere. And if you have enough people belonging somewhere, these people belong to each other too. But I think the place comes first. That's what the word indigenous means. It means to be born inside. It's a place-based identity, not a human-centered identity. When you have that, you don't have religion, because you don't have an attempt to restore something that has no need of restoration. So as all the great religions seem to suggest, something happened. Our ability to belong somewhere, and therefore to each other, was savagely compromised somewhere along the way. And we've taken that to be a sign of transgression in some religions, of illusion in some other religions, of a broken circuitry. I wonder if there's any other story that accounts for the persistence of the longing in the absence of the longed for. I wonder if that's what modern humans are doing. Are they longing after that belonging? Have we ever known it? I don't suspect we have. So I think it's shadow.
We as in the modern?
Contemporary humans,
right.
Yeah. It's a terrible characterization because there's a lot of varieties, you know. There's a lot of skillfulnesses and ways of living that completely dismiss what I just said. So I'll speak about the very small part of the world that looks and sounds and lives like me. I think that's an accurate portrayal of that version of us. Final part of the answer, when you encounter people who seem to exercise the radical hospitality and etiquette of belonging, it does something to you instantaneously. You're in the presence of something you didn't know you were longing for, and it sets up a longing in you. That's part of your gratitude, is that you would have it otherwise now. And is that a question of being simply displeased with your current situation? No. It's much deeper than that. It's not displeasure. It's like an encounter with the divine. If it's unprecedented, in the moment before, there's no such thing as the divine. In the moments after, that's all there is. That's how transfiguring or disfiguring it is. I think the encounter with people who belong has a divine quality to it for those of us who don't.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Good.
Well, I wrote this question down, and then I thought that it can be misunderstood or hard to understand, but I'll just read it the way I wrote it and see.
It's in English though, right?
It is in English.
Okay, so we'll be all right.
Yeah. But here it is. How do you notice or perceive or feel the presence of the other world here on the farm?
On the farm.
Or in life. But we're here, so let's start here maybe. I guess it's the other world that's a little bit...
Yeah.
You'll have to interpret it.
That's what I was going to do, yeah. I think it's wise to, just as I'm beginning the answer, a hummingbird is just outside the window. Yeah. Any questions, sis? Here I am, defying everything at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The other world makes too hard and fast a distinction from this one, as a phrase. So I'm not sure I'd go with the notion of the other world or another world in this sense. But in this sense, we could imagine that there's a mingling. I don't know what the proportions are. But humans that are capable of awe are capable of, quote, the other world. They're capable of being on the receiving end of some other kind of order or sequence or... So I was in the Mediterranean. And I was working the crew of a sailing ship, and we were in a Jesus big storm off the coast of Sicily. And we're hand bailing to stay afloat, so it was very dangerous. And we were fairly sure that we're not going to survive this thing. So the dying, even though there was no injury and no sickness, but the possibility of dying, not the possibility, the presence of dying was adamant, you see. The presence of your death will do things to you, whether or not you die. Then, of that. That's the preamble. So in the midst of the storm, I just go up to, and I tie myself to the wheel. In the rage, in the blast, you know. It's very Shakespearean, or Hemingway, or whatever. Shakespeare. And I was very forlorn. So I was about 20. Wouldn't live to see 21. And really feeling things for my mother who would have nothing to bury. So, and you know, somehow lost in the awe of it. And suddenly, I'm not in the storm. And it's very sudden. And there's no moment before and after. It's just the total eclipse of everything that before that moment was the next moment. I was in the presence of something. This presence had a syntax, if you will, which I'm translating now by describing it to you. It didn't say anything, but its presence was articulate, severely. Not savagely, but severely it was. Its presence meant something. I'm saying it said something. It didn't actually, but it meant something. It had a consequence by virtue of its appearance for me. And I will say now, out of intellectual laziness, that this is what it said. Your life from this moment on will be a kind of work that you must undertake to find where your self-determination ends and your fate begins. Back in the storm. That's a true story. That shit absolutely happened. Where was I in those moments? Well, who cares? I'm not troubled by the question. Where was I? I was, there was a sustaining presence called me. It's the best I can do. I wasn't blasted to my constituent parts by it. But man, was I ever radiated. And the best way I can describe it is what I said to you earlier. Before that moment, there was no such thing as this something. After that moment, there was only this something. And the world slowly made its way into that, the radiation of that encounter. And the slow incursion of the world, again, was the place where the translation has to happen. Then and since, and now, and in this moment of me telling it to you. Is that the other world? I hope so. Does it mean well? I don't know. Is it destructive? Probably not by design, but by virtue of our chicanery and nonsense. There's destruction that comes as a consequence of that radiation. And that's why, you know, time immemorial, cultures have had warnings built into their teaching about premature exposure to the real thing for young people, even middle-aged people. I think I understand why. Because you can be driven to madness easily by awe and wonder. Easily. So it's volatile stuff, yeah? The other world prevails, but doesn't persist in contact with this one. But it's not always that dramatic, is it? It's as dramatic as the hummingbird at the window, well timed. It's as dramatic as a spectacular day, which within 48 hours will lose the nurturing warmth of being able to walk outside in your shirt sleeves. And that'll be gone for friggin' half a year. That's drastic, right? And it registers upon us in terms of comfort, but other things too, of what's possible, of the beginning, of the ending, of bounty, which as a farming person, you work so hard to try to tip the scales somewhat in your favor, you know? And of course, you bring the sheep in from the pasture and on and on and on and on and on. And all of these things are little incursions of, quote, the other world into this one, I think. And this is why the principle of farming, as best as I've been able to figure it out, is watching, not doing. We call it watching the farm channel around here. You just, that's what fences are for, to lean on, to see. But the thing won't grab you by the throat until you look. You know, it'll pass you by. You're the one that has to stop. Not count on being stopped. You have to work stopping into your work. And then you're more monk-like than you ever imagined you'd be. Until the next time. That the whirlwind comes through and has its way and the awe strikes. And it's important to say that awe isn't helpful. It clearly doesn't care about your plans or about your debt load. Clearly not. And yet if you credit it with any kind of moral or spirit intelligence, best listen and then make your debt calculations accordingly. But listen first. So it's a kind of, I mean, I love the fact that it's so. Yeah. And I hope that there's some reciprocity to that affection.
Beautiful. That could be a film. Just that answer, there's a film.
I know.
But I don't know how to make all these films. So. We'll see. In your younger days, you attended divinity school. What's your present-day relationship with Jesus?
Huh. I wouldn't use the word relationship to describe the thing. It's a kind of beat-up word today, and it immediately assumes a kind of ongoingness, yeah. But it's fitful, you know. It's not easy to retain and sustain a working engagement with a figure that's landlocked in history, that's ensnared in history, no. Not that history is the problem. The problem is to try to universalize, to leave the history behind is the problem. Okay, but so as not to get too far down the line too quick. No, I don't have any doubt that there was such a man. No, I don't have any doubt that he wasn't the only one. One what? The only Jesus. Was he a problem at the time? Seems to have been. Did he have problems? It's hard to imagine not. Seems not to have written anything down. Flamed out pretty soon in the arc of things. It's going to be okay?
I think so. I mean...
It's not going to drive in here. I'm just asking from the sound point of view.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Well, it's hard to do anything about it because if we close everything, then I need the electricity to
Right.
light.
Okay, no, we'll keep going.
So I think we'll just keep going.
Jesus is a question, I think. Not the only one. A good one, though. I think he, as best as I've been able to tell, that's a big qualifier. I think he radicalized the understanding of love engaged, not felt, engaged, acted upon, articulated, planted. Yeah. Took a lot of chances, it would seem. May not have been the best calculator of consequence. It's a real treat for the mind to imagine what an old man Jesus might have been able to come up with. Threatens to sound heroic from time to time if you don't let in the sorrowing that I think is part and parcel of his take on trying to make a go of spirit love in a colonized, dispirited place, which I take the Palestine of the time or the Judea of the time to be that, a dispirited place that had been living under the yoke of the Roman presence for a long time. That's a little bit of sort of response to the history of it. For me, it was a great awakening. Not in the sense of any kind of, quote, personal relationship. I really don't know what that means. And a lot of people listening could say, yeah, it shows. Okay, fine, it shows. But I don't really hanker after a personal relationship with a dead figure. Oh, dead, so there's no... Oh, I didn't say there's no continuity. Clearly there is. Were you saying he didn't die? No, I'm not saying he didn't die. I'm saying it seems pretty obvious he did. And like for most of us, it didn't end things. So there's an ongoingness to the work that he undertook, whereby it seems like his example became a parable. Very hard to imitate, but remarkably convulsive, volatile, hard to domesticate. Jesus remains the principal problem for the Christian church. Hard to domesticate. It's not easy to found an international organization on the spindly foundation of what he did, it seems. I was lucky, though, at school because the teacher at the time, this is fourth year university, it was a course just called The Parables of Jesus, which I didn't, as far as I knew, they were just goofball stories. I didn't realize a parable was is radioactive, a literary construct as it is. That's what I meant by convulsive earlier. The parabolic consequence is that something happens in the utterance. When you have mastered the work, you're not talking about something anymore. You're talking, and so something. Yeah. That gathers all around him, it seems. That's why there's so much confoundment, agitation, because just tell us what to do. Just give us the answer. We're pouring all of this in your direction. All you have to do is clarify and simplify. And I don't know that he refused to do it. I suspect he couldn't, based on what had come to him. So, hard-working fella. But man, that's nothing compared to the work necessary to do justice to his example. Yeah. And then you learn the history, and then you realize the history, the Jewish history, the colonized history, the history of the time, Eastern Mediterranean, in the presence of Hellenic, mystery religions, all of those things, those so-called lost years, all of that stuff belongs to the confoundment of a contemporary person who wants to consider these things. It's part of the vestment, isn't it? It's part of the raiment. Yeah. So I'm glad he happened. And people tell me that perhaps of all the things I did in this room, the one that remains the most redolent, the most reverberant, the most consequential, it has come to be called the Jesus session, where I just stood behind me here at the end of the room. And 4 hours a day, 4 hours at a time, twice a day for 4 days, everything I'd gathered around me, Jesus-wise, I talked about, really for the first time. And so far, the only time. And a former Jesuit, a would-be priest, was in the class. He's responsible for the paintings behind me. He came up to me and he said, "That was the most dangerous thing I've ever heard." And he took my hand and shook it. Yeah. That goes beyond accolade. That's something else. It's another category, no? And in some fashion, I took my lead in how to do Jesus from the Jesus example. Yeah. So I'm glad I didn't grow up in a place that was Jesus heavy or a time. Why am I glad? Because I didn't have much to get over, creedally speaking. I didn't have much to set aside or to reconsider or to fight with. I could love the learning that it invited. And that's principally what it was. And I was, through divinity school and beyond, I felt particularly drawn to congregationalize around his example. So there's a bit of loneliness in that, but it's a preferred loneliness because instinctively, I don't find the congregationalizing around the likes of Jesus to be a Jesus-inspired thing very much. Sounds a little harsh, a little judgmental. I'm just saying the place wouldn't do well to have me in its midst You know, I tried to get into the priesthood when I went to Harvard. Once they realized I'd never been to church, they clearly counseled me otherwise, yeah? Which is wise. So, occasionally it's been Jesus and me and Jesus. I don't think that's a personal relationship. I think it's a condition of learning. And I was willing. And all of the various vectors that through which he comes from his time to this time are generous, basically. For which I'm grateful. Yeah.
Would you speak a little bit about the sort of Sunday school version of Jesus? Like the, do you know what I mean by that? Or should I go in further?
Well, I didn't go to Sunday school.
Right.
So I'm alert to the fact that there's a Sunday school version of Jesus. But I shouldn't speak with any authority about it, you know. I guess it resembles not the best of children's literature, that particular kind of ghetto, that literary ghetto. Jesus is hard to take if you just want him to be user-friendly and a nice bedtime event. It's just hard to take. You have to leave a lot of stuff out, you know, or take the edges off, or decide that's not what that is. It's a lot simpler than that. I'm not saying Jesus is not good for kids. I'm just saying, as a genre, the Sunday school Jesus, I don't think brings out the best in the contemporary mind. And the contemporary mind needs a lot of work, right? Not just keep it busy, keep it honest. Plus, I mean, the volatile, stand-up ghetto Jesus, and I think there's such a thing there, would probably have been a marvel with kids, but not with a Sunday school version of himself. Now, I'm not the first person to imagine such a thing, and Dostoevsky wrote a book called The Brothers Karamazov, in which there's a chapter that's often published on its own called The Grand Inquisitor. And it's a long version, but the short version is the Grand Inquisitor is set up by the church to scan the horizon for the Antichrist, basically. And this guy's arrested somewhere and he's in jail, and he's not claiming to be anything, but people are making claims about him. And so the Grand Inquisitor comes to see what this is all about and whether or not this could be legit. I mean, there's only one thing worse than this never happening, if that's your job, and it would be this happening. So the amazing rendition of the story is the Grand Inquisitor does all the talking in the chapter, just like the Pontius Pilate scene, you know. Jesus just doesn't say, if Jesus is the guy in the story, if he is, he doesn't say a word. Not in his own defense, just nothing. Doesn't set the record straight. But it's clear they turned on him again. That's the gist of the story, I think, that even though we've got X number of centuries of Jesus-informed time in the West, it's no indication that Jesus would be in any way recognized. And if he was, whether or not he'd be approved of in the contemporary setting, you know. So Jesus needs a lot of work. You know, he's simple, but he's not easy. And there are others. He's not the only one. But he's a good one. And he'll certainly do. You know, if you're looking for a place to start, you could do worse. But not probably the Sunday school version. I don't know that he's in there. With the kids, yeah. But in the literary ghetto called that, I don't think so. I could be wrong.
But the thing that amazes me also is that the Sunday school version seems to prevail past Sunday school. It
Yeah.
seems adults are in the same...
Sure. Because...
like simplified understandings and...
Yeah, gentle Jesus, meek and mild.
Yeah.
Is user-friendly, as I said. It's not a hair shirt, you know. It asks very little of you. But if I take one snippet of a story, so he comes along, and he seems to be gathering people around him, and he's kind of choosing them. And it's not clear that he's choosing the best and the brightest. But there's a kind of throwdown that happens almost every time. He basically says, let's go. You waiting for something? This is the something. Let's go. And the first response most of the time is, you know, great. I got this thing. I just have to take this call. You know, right after, I'm yours. Just, can you hold on for a second? Tell me where you're going to be, I'll catch up to you. Kind of thing, no? Because it's never a good time for a crisis. And Jesus is a crisis. And the persistence of anti-critical expectation goes, as you've said, well beyond childhood. In fact, I don't know that it's that characteristic of childhood. It may be more characteristic of post-childhood. You know, just, I mean, to make no comparison at all. But I've received the treatment, you know. Can't you just straighten it out? Like if you know so much, can't you just make it more doable, more recognizable, more user-friendly? Yeah. What's wrong with that? I didn't say there's anything wrong with it. I just say you can get that elsewhere. That's all. We don't all have to do that. Some of us who've been blessed or beleaguered by things, by certain realizations, and burdened with a gift of some kind of articulation of these things. All those people don't have the same job. And Jesus was clearly in that category. You know, a lot of stuff going for him. But doesn't seem to have been able to turn away from the implications. You know, so yeah, this is why there is a kind of child scaled Jesus. You know, I saw a man who resembles a lot of things I'm describing to you now, in the flesh, not in a fit, in the flesh. I saw him, okay? He did a lot of the things I've been describing here. And I tell you, the way he was with children was remarkable. He had no children of his own, not a prerequisite. He burned incendiary hot, phosphorescent. When he was with kids, he had a kind of child frequency. And they knew it. They knew they weren't, They knew they weren't being talked to like this. They knew they were in the presence of somebody who saw them, not encouraged them to be children forever, just for now. And he wasn't a child himself. He was a place where childhood got recognized. And in the same day, an hour later, could be making a case for the radicalized love that the human heart is capable of, that is so mandatory now. In an hour, he could do both of those things. So, like I said, he wasn't the only one. I've been lucky enough I saw it in the flesh, you know. And I saw one more detail. Same man. I saw in the same crowd, in response to exactly the same thing said by him, I saw people in the crowd, men and women both, who would have bedded down with him in that instant, regardless of the presence of other people. It was that intense. And in the same crowd, in response to the same thing, I saw people who would have killed him had they had any opportunity at hand to do so, right then, regardless of whether there's people in attendance or not. What do you call that? Does it sound a little biblical? The Bible gets it right sometimes. These things are in the world. It's not anti-history. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you so much for watching part 1 of the mixtape series. There's also a part 2 and a part 3. However, the second and third parts are not going to be made available publicly on YouTube. So in order to access those, there's 2 ways. The first way would be to become an Orphan Wisdom Scriptorium member. And there's a link in the description below with all the details of how you can join there and all the other benefits that you would get if you join there. The second way with which you could access the part 2 and part 3 of the mixtape series would be by becoming a Campfire Stories Patreon member. And by becoming a member there, you also become one of the people who make it possible for me to keep Campfire Stories running. Thank you so much.